What scares you the most about the ocean? Story 1. The vastness of it. It's like outer space, but with an enticing entrance of waves and sand. When I was a kid, I used to swim out past where the waves would break and ride the swells. In my early 20s, having not been to the ocean since I was a kid, I did the same. Suddenly, I became aware of its infinite vastness and felt like a grain of sand with my feet dangling down in it. The realization absolutely terrified me. These days, I enjoy exploring the world through Google's satellite maps. Sometimes I'll follow the coast out to where you can see the landmass drop off to the depths, and I literally lose my breath. Story 2. How unpredictable it is. Like giant rogue waves. People used to think they were just made up stories by sailors, but we now know they actually happen, much more frequently than anyone thought. Reminds me of when I was in Rio Maggiore in Cinque Terre, and there was a German tourist casually sitting on a rock dangerously close to the waves, which were 8 to 10 feet crashing against the cliffs. My friends and I watched, and I half jokingly said, all it would take is one wave hitting in the right spot to just wash her away. Sure enough, it happened seconds later. I watched in disbelief as a wave crashed right into the crack in the rocks I had envisioned and moved its way upwards to the girl. She backed up as fast as she could, but the wave still got her and dragged her downward. Luckily for her, there was a tide pool-like formation that prevented her from being dragged down the entire cliff, and she was able to hang on for dear life and escape the situation. She lost her top and was cut up everywhere. Super shocking, just glad she survived. She handled it well though, and thankfully her friend had a spare shirt. Ha ha, story 3. Its sheer depth and what it could hide. I went snorkeling in Hawaii. I was in this area where I went from seeing the ground beneath me to seeing nothing. It was like I went off an underwater cliff. All of a sudden, I felt this primal fear. Looking at the depths with nothing around, I couldn't tell if I was looking yards or miles out underwater, and I didn't know if something was going to come out and get me. I swam back to land as hard and fast as I could. Story 4. We were free diving down the anchor line off the continental shelf and having fun seeing if we could swim all the way down to the anchor. I was at the surface with another guy, and we were watching our friend swim down the line. He gets to the anchor and turns to look up at us, and we're waving at each other. All of a sudden, we see this massive shadow swimming along underneath him. I can't express how large this shadowy figure was compared to our friend. We started waving at our buddy to come on, and we climbed in the boat. He never looked below him and had no idea. I don't really go out into the deep ocean anymore. Funny how people react differently. I was diving in Kona and was at 20 meters just hanging out on the line, pushing how long I could stay down. And I looked over and thought, hey, a dolphin, since they are known to frequent the bays in the area. Then I look a little closer and see that, nope, it was a shark. And a big one. He was just cruising along, not minding me at all. I didn't feel any fear or anxiety. He was doing his thing, I was doing mine. I worked my way back up the line, and at the surface informed everyone that there's a shark a little ways off. Immediately, all of the instructors just dipped down to go look. It was one of my coolest experiences. Story 5. I grew up next to the ocean. Not oceanfront, a few blocks in, but I can still see the ocean from my house. The ocean affects the weather. I live on a peninsula, and king tides and big storms flood the main road in and out. I say this to make a point. I'm not just rambling. So, when I grew up and left home, moved away from the ocean, I had a bit of a breakdown I wasn't expecting. I missed the ocean viscerally. I got an apartment on a lake, hoping having a beach in my backyard would help, but it didn't. It was a lake, not the ocean. I just started having breakdowns periodically, getting in my car and driving 2 or 3 hours to the ocean every weekend, not even visiting my parents, but just going to the beach to breathe, to calm down enough so I can survive another week, to just relax for a day. I eventually had to move back. It was getting ridiculous. Yeah, so I'm scared of leaving the ocean. I physically can't. Those old Irish folk tales are real. I only feel at home next to it. Story 6. I used to jump off the breakwater at home in Nova Scotia. Grew up on the ocean. Dived for lobster and crab. In my early 20s, I went diving off of a seawall in Cape Breton and happened to open my eyes under the water at the wrong time. Two bull sharks chasing a school of dogfish right through me. The cartridge from one of the bull's dorsal fins touched my underarm. gave me convulsions. I was underwater with little ones before, like nurse sharks, but the bulls were something else. That scared me. Story 7. As a thalassophobia person who used to have a lot of these nightmares during my childhood, all the unknown and giant creatures lurking down below, ready to gobble me up. The ocean is a place where not only can you move around, yet also up and down, hence the sensation that danger can come from anywhere. Plus, we cannot breathe down below, which furthermore reinforces our feeling powerless. Definitively a very hostile place. Didn't realize I had thalassophobia until a high school trip to Costa Rica. We went at night way out into the ocean to see the phosphorescence. I was so stoked and jumped right in. And then about 30 seconds later, it hit me that, holy crap, it is super dark and the ocean is super deep, and I have no idea what's under me at this exact moment. And wasn't there a sign on the beach warning of sea snakes? I noped right out of there and back onto the boat. Have never been in the deep ocean again since. Story 8. Sharks. My experience in a large body of water had been Lake Michigan, where the worst thing I ever came across while swimming was a school of minnows. I was invited to a friend's place in Fort Myers on the Gulf, and within 15 minutes of swimming out, a shark came barreling toward me. I had never seen one before, and remember thinking it looked just like it did in cartoons with that telltale fin. About 50 plus in the water ran screaming to the beach, but I was too far out, and the shark was between me and the beach. I was obviously his target, and he was headed straight for me far too fast for me to get away. All I could think of to do was to stand stock still like you do if a swarm of bees is on you. So I stood in water up to my chest and didn't move. He three-quarters circled me. I easily could have touched him. Then he headed out. Everyone watched me swim back in. My friend on the beach had a heart event, thinking I was a goner. I know that today we are told to try to hit a shark in the snout if attacked, so next time. Later in life, I moved to a place on the Pacific. Gorgeous, but never swam in it. Story 9. Since getting to the bottom is impossible without technology, for me it's definitely the upper region and surface. My God, you go out far enough, you can't see the ocean floor beneath you. Just void and a gauntlet of an underwater environment. Screw swimming out in the open ocean. The only way you or I would ever get to the bottom is if we become one with the ocean for eternity. Once a body dies in the ocean, human or not, the environment will always pick the bones and feed back to the vast ocean wildlife. The dudes that went with the submarine probably fed some sperm whales or some bottom-dwelling scary fish species. Maybe even sharks smelled the remains of that sub. It may be dark as hell down there. Doesn't mean it's empty. Story 10. The sheer depth gives me vertigo and a special kind of terror that comes with how easy it is to be swallowed by it. I'm a good swimmer, but I feel so uncomfortable in large, deep bodies of water, especially ones that are dark and murky, with the flailing of my arms and legs being my only source of buoyancy. I can feel the depths brushing my ankles, waiting for the perfect moment to grab me and pull me below an unrecoverable depth to drown me. When I stare down into the abyss, every primal urge and instinct tells me to run, sending panic and danger signals to every inch of my body. On a level so deep, it penetrates both my mind and soul. I can be on a boat in the middle of nowhere ocean, with no worries other than what I would do if I fell in. I can stare out at whitecaps in wonder and admiration. But you would have to drag me by my ankles, kicking and screaming, to get me into the water on a trip to the beach. Story 11. I enlisted in the Navy when I was 18. Never been anywhere in my life. My first duty station was the USS Meyercord, a fast frigate, 438 long, 46 9 inches wide. We were underway off of California on exercises and night fell. I'd finished my watch and wandered up to the bridge wing and looked out over the ocean. It was pitch black, the kind of dark that finds its way inside you. I looked every which way and could see nothing. Couldn't make out the horizon, no lights whatsoever except the dim light from the bridge. It was somewhat unnerving. After a few minutes, I could barely pick out the lights from a cargo ship a couple miles off. I never felt so lonely in my life until that moment. I was on this tiny, floating island on the biggest ocean. If something happened and the ship went down, my dad wouldn't know his son was gone. I've never forgotten that feeling in 47 years. Story 12. Isolation and no resources beyond what you brought with you. If something goes wrong out there, you might never be found. I live in FLA and was on a boat in the Gulf that stalled and began to sink. No cell phone, radio, or life jackets. We were 19 years old and stupid. We sat there for hours while the boat slowly kept taking on more water. Towards the end of the day, the longshore current had pushed us down the coast and close enough to land that we could see the shoreline. We jumped overboard and started swimming to shore. I was terrified, but so full of adrenaline that I never once paused to look around while in the water. I just swam nonstop until I reached the beach. People on the beach helped us make a few phone calls, and we got the boat towed in during the night. I still love boats in the sea, but prefer to keep the shore in sight. No life jacket or communication equal sign. I'm not going. Story 13. The power and scale. One mistake makes you disappear. There's little worse than getting knocked down by a wave over and over as you're trying to get up, feeling yourself tired after only a few minutes, realizing, oh crap, I'm getting out of breath and I can't get a lungful. Or being on a boat and there's no land in sight in any direction. You look down and it's just blue. And as you sink into it, you realize how fast light disappears below the surface, how if you were to struggle, there's nothing to grab, nothing to push off of. You're just floating. It's quite literally space on Earth. Story 14. I went to the beach at night with a friend a long time ago when I was still in high school, and I've never been more terrified, yet strangely connected to the world. Just these rolling waves of blackness that crashed into the sand like an invitation to an endless void. There was no moon out, and you just saw stars and smelled the salt in the air. Felt like something was calling out to you. I could just imagine a cosmic horror-like entity just waiting just below the surface. Seeing the ocean ripple like it was alive, like twisting skin, and any moment something could rise from the depths. I mean, the sheer vastness of seeing that at night really stuck with me. Story 15. If you have a terrible accident and need help on land, someone can usually get to you. At sea, they might not even find you. That and they're discovering new species every day. I do not want to be miles away from land, wondering if a megamouth shark is down there. I live by Galveston. I even get terrified taking the ferry over to Crystal Beach. It always makes me think of those two ladies who were on a ferry in South Carolina, I think. They were at the front of the ferry and the front gate wasn't secured. The lady driving accidentally bumped the car into neutral and the car went off the ferry and 75 feet straight down. They were in a Tesla or a BMW. I'm not sure. But anyway, they couldn't get the windows open because the key got knocked onto the floor. So they sat there and slowly drowned. That's a nightmare of mine. Story 16. It's heavy. The water's so heavy and so strong. I wasn't even out that deep and was learning how to surf. I fell off my board and was immediately pushed down into some rocks below me. The waves wouldn't stop, and they were so much stronger than me. I couldn't move a muscle. It felt like the waves were never going to stop, and I eventually would have just ran out of air, but luckily it finally let up before I started to feel dizzy. But holy moly, my lungs felt like they were on fire. My boyfriend didn't even notice I was under the water at the time. The ocean taught me to respect her that day, and I promptly ended my surfing career. Story 17. Tsunamis. I live next to the ocean, and this is an actual fear of mine. We've only had one tsunami ever recorded here, and it was in 1929, in a different region than where I am. But still, it could happen again. Also being lost at sea, like after a ship sinks or something. I watched Titanic when I was 7. If I can't see land, that's a big no. If the boat sinks and you don't get in a lifeboat, just being in the salt water for so long, your skin can start to slough off, and that seems even worse than a peaceful freezing to death. Also, there's no way I'm eating fish, so I'd probably starve to death even if I was on a lifeboat. Story 18. How fast orcas will surround you if a seal jumps in the boat. It was close to 45 minutes of them coming at the boat with dorsal fins and a dive right as they came close. Mind you, I was about 14 and grew up rural by that time and had interacted with wild black bears and wolves. After the shock, you can tell how smart they are and have knowledge of boats. I obviously thought they were trying to flip us, and I was yelling at the beach thinking I was going down. The owner of the boat touched one of the orcas that were peeking at the seal. The seal lived as they seemed long gone before the seal jumped in. I'd totally go live in the Puget Sound again, but can't say I'd want that to happen again. Story 19. Anytime you are under the water in majority, you cannot see ahead of you. For the most part, you are literally left in the murk to hope nothing is coming at you ahead. Sure, in some areas the water's clear, but in most areas the water's too dark or murky to see. Unlike space, it's not clear what things are coming at you, and that is scary. But for space, it's scary that one wrong move or malfunction could mean you're floating in space until you die with no retrieval. You just kind of have to eventually accept you're not going to be saved. Both options are scary AF. I prefer gravity and dry land. I do not go into anything other than a pool knee deep, maybe waist deep, and that's stretching it because the crap at the bottom freaks me out too. You or worms or parasites in the water. I had pinworms as a child. I used to swim in drainage ditches in the summer when it flooded. But being a kid is not like being an adult. Ignorance is bliss. Story 20, it's power. When in the ocean on a stormy day, my ex and I were holding hands walking into it when we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm petite, but this was not a small man. He was about 6'3", 270 pounds. Both of us went tumbling and obviously lost one another. I swear I did several somersaults before I slammed and slid the side of my face on the ocean floor and eventually figured out which direction was up, barely managing to run out of there, the danger zone. I had seaweed in my hair and didn't even feel or notice that a titty popped out. He pointed it out and he looked just as damaged. It was embarrassing, but much preferred to drowning. Story 21. I find it more fascinating than scary, and the few aspects I'm afraid of I'm usually drawn to. For example, I remember while on a snorkeling trip in the Bahamas, a ferry took our group out into deeper waters, which were still pretty clear. After jumping in, putting my head underwater, and looking around at the 50 and 60 feet bottom, some fish and dead coral, I turned around and began to notice some 200 feet away, a very flat rocky surface which stretched from one end of the horizon to the other, past it a sudden drop into a bottomless void where the light faded into pitch darkness, beyond it an endless ocean abyss of nothingness. There's almost no words to describe how small, vulnerable, and insignificant you feel on the edge of a continental shelf, peering into its wide open void. Could you describe that as fear? Yes, but I was still more fascinated and awestruck by it than anything else. Story 22. When I was a kid, my family went on a sailboat with a family friend around the Grenadine Islands. I was too young to really know or remember exactly where we were at the time, but the captain said he was going to anchor so we could snorkel across a reef to the Cut. Cool, right? The Cut was a trench that was terrifying. An 8-year-old me tried to swim over it. Immediately, the temperature dropped compared to the shallow reef water we had been swimming in. All you could see was pure black under you. I didn't get very far before I turned around in a panic. My memory wants to say this thing was at least 50 yards across, but I couldn't tell you with certainty. It was just terrifying. My dad tried to dive down as far as he could, and I slowly watched him disappear. Scared the hell out of me. As a grown adult, I wouldn't do that even now. Pure black. A quick Google search doesn't come up with said trench, but it's the scariest thing I've ever done in the ocean. I don't think it was the Puerto Rican trench, but we were in the area. So maybe? Story 23. I had a near-death experience in 2020. I've never had a problem taking a swim to the buoy and back until that day. I don't know what happened. I was trying to swim back to shore and I wasn't moving at all. I was still in the same spot and I wasn't getting tired. I just couldn't anymore. I tried telling my husband, but he couldn't hear me, nor could he swim. So he was freaking out, with no one around to hear him yelling for help either. My body didn't panic at that point. I just gave in and accepted my fate. I felt calm and I started to sink. Out of nowhere, a man's hand grabbed me and pulled me up, turned me on my back, and asked me to try to paddle with my feet. I could barely move. He brought me to shore where I laid there, throwing up so much water as I was crying and shaking along with my husband. The man disappeared before I was able to tell him, "Thank you for saving my life that day." I have not stepped foot in the ocean since. I have learned to respect the ocean. It is so unpredictable and dangerous. I will never put myself or my husband through that horror again. Story 24. I was messing around with Microsoft Flight Simulator today and set a route between Reunion and Mauritius, which are very close together. Halfway through the flight, I couldn't see either island, and it was just open ocean. It made me realize just how terrifying flying across the ocean is. You're flying over something we aren't meant to be in. And if you somehow survive a crash, you'll just be surrounded by vast, deep nothing. I don't know, it weirded me out. Story 25. The acidification due to rising atmospheric carbon dioxide causing massive loss of aquatic life. Due to some quirks of chemistry, water with carbon dioxide dissolved in it is acidic. So more carbon dioxide in the air means a lower ocean pH. Meanwhile, due to so many quirks of biology, many sea creatures have critical parts of their skeletal structure built from what are effectively scale deposits. When the ocean turns acidic, that means that the external structures of many creatures start to dissolve. Story 26. In general, how absolutely little we know about it. We've measured, we've scanned with our best technology, and still far too much of it evades us. We know more about the moon than we do the ocean, and were it not for deep diving creatures we get to see again with wounds that couldn't have been done by smaller creatures, we might not even have an inkling beyond what sailors of yore and today say is out there. Otherwise, it is a baseline thalassophobia at play, which games like Subnautica and Soma play on expertly. In short, no one knows what's deep in the ocean, and I'm sure as hell not going to go in and find out.